welcome to Studio Talks.
After Hours.
Welcome back. You're here with your host, Ember and Boer.
And co-host, Grace Tuthill.
Today, I'm bringing this topic because I really wanted to capture the essence of what this month is about, and it's something that I've only actually got to celebrate like twice in my life, which is Pride. And I think a lot of you are aware that it's Pride Month, and we're nearing the end of it, but it's been on my mind a lot that I haven't done anything or even felt comfortable in my own identity recently in the last couple of weeks enough to like loudly talk about my identity. But in the context of this podcast and the context of art, I think that our sexuality, our gender identity, the things we identify ourselves as to understand ourselves more impacts our artwork a lot. You know, we talked in our first episode about how identity affects the artwork you make, and I don't think that your gender identity, your sexuality, your relationship identity, I don't think those are separate from any of that. So I wanted to talk about two different ways in which my identity has impacted my artwork, specifically through the lens of Pride Month. One of them being that my role as a sculptor has helped me accept things about myself that maybe felt wrong in societal conditioning. There's something very masculine about or perceived masculine about handling power tools and having, strong arms and lifting things. I feel it when I go to job interviews and they ask me, they're like, you can lift 50 pounds, right? And I get asked that, and I always wear my steel-toed boots to my job interviews because they look at me a little sideways, like, can you really do this physical work? And it's always felt like a masculine element of who I am, and regardless of whether that's like society's idea or mine, it's something that I identify as masculine. But being a sculptor has helped me accept that that element of myself is just like a part of who I am and a part of my identity, and regardless of whether doing physical labor is masculine or feminine or not. Also, I wanted to talk about how gender influences our literal form, the actual artwork we make directly. It's not just my gender impacts who I am, and of course that's going to influence the art I make, but it's also going to influence the forms. So my work is really geometric, and we briefly discussed that in our intro episode where we talk about what our work looks like, but my work is really structural and really rigid sometimes. But the way I treat the material in critique has often been said that it's soft or gentle, or I treat it with a certain level of attention that doesn't quite feel as intense and maybe not as masculine. And so these are two different avenues I kind of want to explore with you today.
Yeah, and I do want to just take a minute and say, it's a vulnerable subject, even for people that are out and have been out and have a community that supports them. And that's okay to be feeling maybe a little bit timid or to feel like, well, we're new and we're exploring this about ourselves. And to be able to say that, I got that validation through my artwork. And through my practice and through the community. And, it's historical, that it's a boys club in sculpture and in ceramics as well. It's a total boys club. And
the art world is a boys club in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, it's a privilege to make art, right? And so... he was the most privileged, right? So yeah, I can definitely relate to your experience with having to kind of prove your capabilities within sculpture and having to kind of associate those abilities with a masculine presence, and it's liberating and also frustrating to lean into your masculine side while having to rely on that to get anywhere, right? I want strength in my femininity. I'm vulnerable, I'm sweet, I'm soft-spoken, and it helps in a lot of situations and it doesn't in others. And so you have to really pull these parts out of you, because I would say that we both have a lot of masculine and feminine traits within us, and
right,
to really use them when the time fits.
And explicitly, I think when we were discussing this episode, I wanted to start with the idea of, like, fuck gender. Fuck the idea that we have to be one or the other. This adamant, like, I'm feminine or I'm, like, everything on the spectrum is welcome here. And also, like acknowledging different aspects of yourself and, like, where you feel comfortable on that spectrum when you're acting in different parts of your life or you're playing a role in different parts of your life. Like, sometimes I feel more comfortable being ambitious and intense and domineering in the way I talk about things, not only because it's helpful, but it reminds me that I deserve to take up space in certain places because I've spent a lot of time in art. I've spent 14 years studying art. I'm only 23. That's half my fucking life. And there are moments where I feel like it's within my right to claim my power over my knowledge. I'm not saying that has to be seen as masculine, but for me, it helps me to understand that that's a kind of strong trait that I can lean into and it's not a bad thing. And, you know, I do have a feminine side, of course, but something I actually identify as that was brought up to me by someone I met in the last couple of months that I had never heard of, and maybe you haven't heard of it either, but it was called gray gendered. And it just kind of, like, rung a bell because I was like, what does that mean? Like, what really does that mean? But the way it was explained to me is it's an essence of maybe you feel your gender, but very weakly. Like, there's almost an ambiguous element to, and it's not quite non-binary. Like, I do go by she, her. I don't go by they. I don't really see the need to go by they, them. That doesn't really resonate with me. So I do feel like a woman, and I feel sexual, and I feel powerful in that. But I also recognize that, like, there are some elements of being a woman or being feminine that I don't resonate with, that just, like, don't hit home. I don't want to grow up someday and bear children. It's not a want for me. And, you know, the want to have children is a really big desire for some people. And sometimes my disconnection to that want makes me feel disconnected from my femininity. So it's a little bit of, like, a tangent about how I feel about my own gender. But gray gendered is something that really had an attraction to me as a term, and something I'm still grappling with what it even really means. It's new to me, but it resonated well enough that I've started trying it on for size. You know, I think labels are something that can help us, and, like, how else do we know if we don't, like, feel our way through how it feels to, like, be identified as something like that. Labels can be harmful too, but that's something that I've been exploring recently.
I think in this context they can be empowering. Absolutely. I mean, it takes so much time to actually get to know who you are. And so when you can identify with something, it kind of gives you a sense of self. And I think that's really special.
And I know that I identify as bi, and you do as well.
Well, I'd go and say I would be pansexual.
Oh, yes. We have that distinction, too.
We do, yeah. Everyone's got a special trait, and so I'm just attracted to that something special about every single person. So, not every single, you know, of course.
No. But there's one of those funny distinctions between bi and pan that I think even within their own community is even still discussed to this day, even. Yeah, but let's back up for a moment and even talk about, like, I grew up in Kansas City. We've talked about that, but I grew up somewhere in the Bible Belt, and I'm not saying that Kansas City, the actual, like, in the city part, is super conservative, but, like, it's not normal in Kansas City to always ask people's pronouns. Like, maybe in the last couple years it's become popular enough that people do it when you're young. But, like, you won't catch anyone over the age of 30 in a conservative Bible Belt town, anywhere outside of, like, the actual city. Asking people's pronouns isn't a thing. It's not, like, a cultural thing.
I don't even really experience it here in California all that much, right? I mean, you know me specifically being like, yeah, Grace is an open book if you ask to read.
But, like, teachers will ask here.
Well, so that was going to be my only exception, was in university settings. That has been my only avid experience with people taking the initiative to offer up that window. I mean, we didn't even really do that ourselves in this episodes, and also in when we introduced ourselves as hosts, right? I mean, shouldn't that be the first thing? What are our pronouns? So, Ember, you said that you go by she, her. I prefer she, they. And the she part is really just that of like an apathy for like not wanting to get into a confrontation every single time, to be like, no. But, you know, that kind of apathy makes me feel a little bit disconnected from my LGBTQ community as well, right? That your gender identity and your sexuality is something that you wear with pride as a badge. And so for me to not be like hoisting that flag, kind of in my world, I'm trying to not invalidate myself. You know, there are quiet gays out there. There's quiet gays. Yes. And I am one of them. And but that's not to say that I'm not any more out or that I'm not any more valid.
No.
Or not any less queer. So
absolutely. And I think that's something that you and me share in common, is that like in our own experiences of exploring our own identity, there's always been a little bit of timidness around feeling directly attached, whether it be like due to our appearance or the way we carry ourselves. But there's always a little bit of strangeness on like where you really lie in terms of other people who are loud and proud about how they feel about themselves. And it's always been a little confusing for me. And that has kind of held me back from expressing it in a way that might open me up to people who like could shed knowledge on how to feel more comfortable in that identity.
Yeah, absolutely. I did kind of want to circle back to you bringing up kind of your artwork and having the presence of the masculine and feminine and the visual aspects of your work. Because I am a hard believer that like every single piece of artwork that you make to some extent is a self-portrait. And so this balance of masculine and feminine, I feel like, is in my own work. And it's very validating. And a lot of my work, and I'm working on this myself and trying to really work through it. I know I've probably mentioned it on the podcast a little bit already about giving validation to my experiences, my identity, and my desires, and that it can be prioritized as opposed to how I've just been kind of paying attention to the clay as if that wasn't me. You know?
Or a direct relationship, which is inherently an expression of you. Yeah, your relationship with the clay is also an extension of who you are, because you're the one interacting.
You're putting yourself into it. So I would definitely say that I love your work because of the masculine and feminine features within it, right? I mean, so you have broken glass and rough edges and sharp metal and geometric forms, and all of that has an association of like industrial, like blue collar a little bit with your experiences. And so you think like masculine, absolutely. I can see that you've spent time in warehouses and studio spaces doing
a little rough around the edges.
You're a little rough around the edges. But then the forms that you come up with make me think, and I keep saying this to you, but they feel like rooftops to me. And I know. So you have
or like the structure of like the classic peak home kind of moment where they come to a single ridge point, or
which I absolutely love, because I'm like, oh yeah, that's that Midwestern girl with family values. Like, home was a good place for you, girl.
Darn totin' labeled me and everything. But no, there is this really strong structural element to my work, and that's me leaning into. Like, there was a time when I was young, like, when abstract artwork, like, didn't even tickle my fancy. Like, I was such a representational painter that, like, abstract work was foreign to me. And it was a slow transition for appreciation into it, but really leaning into, I like having, even the way I go about making my work has structure. I have an end vision and I layer until I get to that. But really the layering is what feels feminine. And I've had people comment on the way my metal folds can be almost soft in the way that it cascades or unfolds on top of itself. And also the treatment of the glass and the idea that every layer is placed with intention and it's deconstructed and reconstructed. And there's a lot of like tender moments in that with the material itself where it's kind of like putting together like a rose bush or something, like pricks me all the time. It hurts. I'm literally working with broken glass that can be sharp and rugged and have these kind of unfinished edges, but I'm placing it in a painterly way on top of my sculpture, and that kind of softness to the brushstroke of applying my textures feels like maybe the feminine aspect of it. So I really want to talk about like, yeah, like gender as far as like who you are as a person affects your artwork, but like there's an element of identity that comes through your form too. Like we associate form with gender sometimes. And that's not to say like there can be things appreciated about both sides of things. You know, there's nothing wrong with strong, sturdy, or ruggedness, and there's nothing wrong with soft treatment. But it is interesting to me, this idea that we could place gender on a form. You know, we talk about how language impacts our understanding of things. And this is a common debate in other languages that have gender attached to them, right? Like when other languages have gender attached individual words or objects.
Are you talking about like Romance languages that have like masculine and feminine?
Yeah, like even like Spanish or Latin or Italian. Like I learned Italian. Italian has lots of gender in it as well. And so just associating masculine or feminine with words, there's a big debate over that right now. And we don't need to get into nuances of like language and gender, but the idea that like we do assign some sort of attribute to masculine or feminine, and that has a play in how we see the treatment of our material or work, our final pieces, the impact they leave on us.
I know that we've dropped this word before, but it almost sounds like gatekeeping, right? We attribute certain qualities to certain genders, and then it makes people uncomfortable when they identify with a different gender to branch into that and have those qualities.
Yeah, I would say as people, you know, like I lost you a little bit there on like the actual texturing of work, but yeah, there is like an uncomfortableness with personal identity. But like I don't know, when a work comes off as like strong or intense or rigid, it doesn't really make me uncomfortable. And when a piece is like ultra feminine, it doesn't quite make me uncomfortable. But it is strange that like we even find gender in form for me. That's inquisitive.
Right.
Something I've...
And so when you're saying that, you're kind of saying like geometric versus organic, and that you would assign geometric and structure and architecture to more masculine and organic to more feminine. And I think that makes sense. I've heard that before in regards to like vertical is masculine but horizontal is feminine. I've heard that association literally in an art class before.
Or like phallic structures, right?
Exactly.
Like museums have like an upright, rigid, and then but like feminine forms invite you in, or have like a softness or a curve or an undulation of like something more inviting. And I mean, I think this is a lot of societal conditioning. I'm not saying that these are universal things, that everyone has the same connotation, but there are quite widely talked about, associations with form having one or the other, and that's why I wanted to establish like fuck gender. Like we don't have to think of everything as gender, but there are these like strange associations we have that like structuralism. Like I associate my ambition with masculine traits. Right. Like ambition to me feels masculine. Not that women can't be ambitious. That's not it at all. But it does seem like a more dominant trait of like assertion or taking up space, whereas femininity seems to respond to things, or
I think there's a different approach in navigating the world, and you can have a softer or a rougher approach for sure. I've met men that I think have a more soft communicative style that I would say is like typical in like what I see like women doing. And so I would like to say that like society has attributed one to the other, but it's not all that common that I see that in real life play out, right? I've seen
like people don't adhere to like one side or the other by any means as total people. But what I'm saying is like by recognizing we attribute some of these things to different ideas or forms or textures or interactions even, or the way we carry ourselves, like it's almost like seeing gender as a tool to carry yourself a certain way or to give a certain effect with your artwork. Like okay, so if we're using feminine as a way to describe soft form, it's like, say, like, okay, remove femininity then and just talk about form as being like this form is like soft, it's welcoming, it's, you know, but they're like labels that help you categorize different feelings or effects, right? Like almost talking about gender as a tool to understand things rather than like an entire identity of something you have to be.
I don't know if this exactly follows what we're saying, but I was reflecting on the fact that even within my woodfire community, I've gotten a couple comments that my work is feminine in the sense that they're kind of embryonic, right? There's these round organic forms and they're expanding, and it kind of feels like, you know, a little egg kind of growing, a little zygote, you know, whatever. Which is funny because I agree, like, there's not a huge pull in me to be a mother. Like, that's not a thing.
But you're creating something and you're breathing life into it. And I would say men that make art have a feminine quality in the way that they are creators. And that usually creation is associated with femininity in general.
Yeah.
Mother Earth.
Yeah.
So, but there's power in androgyny. There's power in one side over the other. But like, I guess when I think of my masculine versus my feminine elements, it's like, what do I want to channel in a certain moment? Like, who do I need to be in that moment? And like, what part of me do I identify with to be who I need to be in any moment? I'm the kind of person that carries myself in my daily life. And instead of asking like, how or why should I do something? I'm like, I know this is something I would like to do. How do I become the person who's capable of doing it? And in that sense, recognizing these different traits and how they appear to other people and how I relate to them, acknowledging those things and then using them to my benefit to carry myself in a certain way. Which is strange because I'm really talking about like recognizing these traits as like tools that I use to understand how I'm perceived.
That seems conflicting to me. Like, I don't know how comfortable I feel with that, and there's no judgment on my part, but I don't know. I guess I've always been kind of the quirky person to just kind of be, you know, set and kind of being this kind of weird, quirky person. And like, you're saying that in certain situations you need to pull from a specific deck, you know what I'm saying?
Well,
that like
I'm saying at the end of the day, masculine and feminine for me are labels, and that like gender is a spectrum. No matter who you are, like I see gender on a spectrum, and in some moments I view myself more on one side or the other in order to navigate situations better. Maybe that's a survival thing. Maybe that's
everything's a survival thing. I said it. I won't take it back.
Don't.
I think everything's a survival method, and we're just kind of learning how to cope and navigate and live true to ourselves. And I
catch you growing more timid as we talk about this, though. Yeah, I view them as tools, but like you may have an entirely different view of how you navigate this, because to you, to me, as your best friend, it seems like you are just trying to be your most honest and authentic self at any moment. And
always,
and expressing that efficiently. It's why you're so specific about the way you articulate things and about how you come across when you participate in creating literature for like your thoughts. You want to articulate things properly because you want to make sure whatever you say, it's as authentic and as clear cut as possible.
Yeah.
And so I can see how my view of gender being something I use as labels to help myself navigate is not resonant, because like you don't see yourself through that quite same lens, right?
It's true, and it's been a struggle for me to participate with pride within the LGBTQ community, because I try and be like, well, it's not super relevant. And to be honest, yeah, you caught me. I was being a little bit more timid because if I'm being honest and uncensored, I'm frustrated. I have a soft disposition. not disposition. I have a soft demeanor.
Mm-hmm.
I have a sweet and gentle cadence.
Which we love
Which we
love
I
about
love
her.
Myself. I love myself, absolutely. But to be typecasted as this like ultra feminine, like, oh yeah, Grace wears floral print and she has long hair, so she, and you know, like, us, like, you know.
Well,
so,
we've also talked about our perception, like other people perceive us as straight
Right.
or not a part of the queer community, and it's something we struggle with because we are also working towards our own identity while simultaneously being perceived so opposite to maybe our own internal feelings.
Part of me also is like, who the hell is perceiving us? Because like mom and dad aren't actually seeing me. I don't think I've really come across anyone who's invalidated my identity. Just people that haven't asked, just conversations that I haven't had yet. And so I am more shy and meek and timid.
Well, can I share how I relate to that? Because there was a point at which I felt bi internally, and I had never like actually externalized the words because it didn't feel important to me. Like it wasn't something I needed to externalize about myself to recognize it. But then there came a day where like it bubbled up. There was just a day where it was like not saying it is doing more against me than for me. And it was just an internal feeling I had that declaring I was bi was going to do more for me than not saying anything. And it like wasn't immediate. It was like over years. And there was just someday it was like maybe not acknowledging that I feel that way out loud is now hindering me, when before it didn't feel important.
Well, I think that it's a journey in making art to explore yourself, explore your identity, explore your relationship to others, how you communicate with others, how you connect with others. And so to know yourself fully is a step in the right direction to making truly authentic, impactful artwork. And so it's a duty that we have to ourselves to find out who we are as individuals and what brings us the most love and joy into our life. And,
Well, you definitely don't owe the externalization to anyone. That's for sure.
No, I caught myself off guard. I was just like, women, like, please, come here. I know I don't look it, but like, very shy. But yeah, so I mean, like, it's so important to do this internal work and to actually be able to articulate how we see ourselves. I remember in high school, this is not even really art related. I remember my senior year of high school, my English teacher asked the entire class to like fill out a paper where you basically like wrote about who you were. Like name like 5 characteristics of yourself. Things like that. Like it was like a long list of just like things that, and honestly, I couldn't answer it, a lot of it. And a lot of the other students couldn't either. And I understand I was in a public high school, and like there's a herd mentality when you're in public high school. But even at 17, the majority of a 30-person classroom couldn't articulate who they were.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
There's like a lot of like ether, like kind of just being like out in the wide open of just like riding the waves of your experiences, especially at that age. Not enough language, not enough emotional, intellectual capacity, and then also like being put on the spot.
Yeah.
To also be like, who are you? Like, shit, it's Thursday. At like 7 a.m. What do you want from me?
I thought the same thing. I was like, I'm too stoned for this, dude. But yeah, I remember that experience being like, God, I don't actually know who I am. And it's still kind of a journey for myself. And I notice in my artwork that there's so much like, but the clay, but like the miracle of clay, and like, and so I'm trying to kind of continue this process with my artwork of like seeing myself in it as well. That I am just as much of an influencer and a creator in the work as the work is itself, and it's a relationship and I'm reflected in that. And there's masculine and feminine traits, and people can say like, oh, organic, it's growth, it's creation, so it must be. One person, which I thought was really funny, that had no art background. There was just this guy that, like you couldn't catch him without like scratching his belly and a cigarette in his mouth, like
right.
you just
chilling, in essence.
I know, just totally chilling. And he looked at my artwork and he was just like, it makes me think of like fallopian tubes and like eternity and like is this everything? And I was like, damn, I think you might be right, dude. Because you remember my artwork used to be much more about negative space and a lot of like pathways, and so we had a lot of like linear lines in my work that were interconnected and interwoven. And it's transitioned a little bit more from the internal to kind of like the full body form that it is right now. But a lot of my work is, my gender and my sexuality is integral because it's who I am and I am reflected in the work. But my work specifically is not about my gender or sexuality. If anything, I feel pretty apathetic towards being called a woman, so that feels reflective, right? But my work right now is kind of about like this growing expansion of like trying to grow your presence and grow as an individual, and then kind of being worn away and eroded by external elements. And so like as much as you do to grow, you're still always going to be affected by the environment around you, and that's going to reflect.
I think you're absolutely right in the sense of neither one of us make work directly through the lens of our gender identity or our relationship identity or our sexuality like that. We don't operate making artwork through that lens, but your work is also structural. Like we talked about how structural my work is, and your work is very structural. You focus on the integrity of your form and how strong it is with acute sensitivity, and that's a large part of your work, but it presents itself and it's a part of the inner structure of the work, whereas like my structure is like almost like the immediate thing you notice, and then upon looking at it you recognize the softness, and your work has a much more immediate like organic form. But upon investigating, if I were to look at your work without knowing it and look at it, the longer I would ponder it, the more I'd have to question like, how did you make it? Right? Like, how did you actually go about creating something that's strong yet hollow yet, So, it's less a statement about like gender is the construct of all we do, but I just wanted to bring to light like how strange, weird, peculiar, interesting it is that we like assign these like, we identify things in form to help us rationalize or understand the reaction we have to them. And of course, I absolutely agree with you. Like, the work will always be a reflection of your identity. And so regardless of whether your work is about your queerness or your gender or your, your relationship identity, any of those things, it will always be a reflection of your experiences. And navigating that part of yourself is part of your experiences. So when you feel agony or frustration over your own position with those identities, sometimes that will come through in the work, right?
Yeah. So yeah, it is challenging even in an artist community, even when it's technically supposed to be a safe space, to have pride and be open and say it unapologetically. And so thank you for kind of reminding me the topic of shame and that inner turbulence that you get. I would say so too, that I have an inner turbulence around shame, and it's not just gender, it's not just sexuality, it's so much that society puts on you. But they sure put a lot of shame on you for not fitting the stereotype of your gender, and that is a tragedy, and it's a crime to make anybody feel like they're not inherently whole and a wonderful contribution to the world.
Well, I thought I would share something while you were talking about your family that was really comforting to me when I sort of kind of came out to my parents. And I didn't do it in any like bold way. I didn't like sit them down and tell them. I think my dad found out through my college applications. I like checked the LGBTQ box on my college application. He was like, "Was that right?" And I was like, "That's right." And like nothing else was said in that moment, like, which is sweet that he didn't like put pressure on me to like talk about it. But when I told my mom, like, I don't know if you know this, but like I officially feel this way about myself, and like it's something I'm deciding to declare about myself. she said something that I think maybe anyone could benefit from hearing, and we love my mom as an internal dialogue, such a sweet soul.
So much. I want to be like her.
But she said, when I told her that I felt bisexual and that seemed a part of my identity, is she said something that like totally took me out of left field, which was that, you know, I think that everyone is somewhere on the spectrum of attracted to the other gender. It can be as simple as agreeing that like a guy finds another guy like he's a handsome man. It can be as simple as small acknowledgments of beauty in other people, all the way to fully being attracted to, romantically, sexually attracted to the other gender. But she said, I feel like if everyone could acknowledge that we're all somewhere on the spectrum, we would all feel a lot more comfortable with ourselves and a lot more seen, heard, and safe. And I wasn't expecting any sort of reaction like that, but it was calming and reminding that like yeah, I think most people can look at someone of the same gender and be like, you're an attractive person, right? And it doesn't mean that you're gay. It just means like I can acknowledge that there's beauty in other people in all sorts of ways. And even that simple acknowledgement, like that it's this large ambiguous thing. It's not, we are not one or the other. It's not a switch that you flip, like, you know, that we all exist somewhere in the ethos of like relating to other people and how we want to interact with them, you know? So yeah, that was just something really comforting that she told me. And when she said that and I viewed everyone else's experience through that lens, I felt less alone and more like, you know, like, yeah, some people would probably do really good to admit to themselves. I don't know. Gender affects form, but like identity of like my sexuality, my relationship, like my attraction to being bi, my attraction to polyamory, and my attraction to gray gender. Like these are 3 labels I'm exploring about myself. And to say that my most recent work doesn't exude any of that, like the blood, sweat, and tears, like all of my recent work was red. And if any of you have seen it, like that's an extension of my own internal anguish over being forced to deal with my internal self during the pandemic. This is a very big part of my experience, is like I think that we were all forced to deal with like a primal version of ourselves because there wasn't a lot of escape or coping mechanisms in the midst of the pandemic. And like, so these labels that I've thought about but maybe haven't even gotten to like test out in public settings about how other people react to me. Because as much as I'd like to be like, other people's perception doesn't affect me, wouldn't it be lovely to be oblivious to that? But you know, we're not. Like when you tell people a certain label that identifies you, there's connotations that come with that, and that can be an intimidating part of having pride. Can be a very intimidating part of acknowledging who I am out loud in a way that validates me, but also doesn't make me question myself.
Well, it's a little bit more freeing in the art community because, like, you're saying that even within the art community, it can be scary to share these labels that you've given yourself because you don't know how you're going to be received. And it's an important reminder, and you mentioned it earlier, that Pride started as a riot because we physically would not be safe to share our identities, our gender, and our sexuality openly in the past. I mean, I still can't share it with my family. I do want to say that as much progress as it is, society still has the lens of like, yeah, you can do whatever you want as a woman. You can be a professional. Don't let it hinder the child rearing, though. Don't let it hinder the family building, though. And so women are constantly like, they're still associated that women are the nurturers and the caretakers of the children. And so it's just like, whatever you do outside of that, good for you, but don't let it hinder the
Or
other.
have a career, do what you want, but like get it done by the time you're like mid-20s, 30s, then have kids. And it's like at some point you're still expected, or people suggest that at some point down the line you should put your career aside and do that thing. And part of me wants to say that only older people have ever pushed that on me, but that's not really true. We're at the age where a lot of people we know are having children or getting married, and there's nothing wrong with that path, but not identifying with it. It's strange how that can be bold. Like why do we have pride? pride, the idea that you need to be proud of who you are, because it's still a courageous thing to be in this world where it's not always looked as a positive thing. And pride is still necessary, because the first pride was a riot. The first pride was a genuine fight for rights for people who were not accepted. It was less than 50 years ago. It was less than 50 years ago. And so sometimes I do maybe even feel a little guilty for not participating in pride, because like part of me is like, by identifying this as this, like maybe I should be more of an advocate for people like me who might be even more shy or even more incapable of expressing, or who might live in a situation where they can't even be who they need to be. And sometimes I feel almost guilty for not taking literal pride in who I am, because there might be someone who also needs other people around them to take that moment and take that stride. So it's like a little bit of guilt, but also like, well, I've been lucky to be well accepted by everyone I know. But at the same time, there's a distance from how do I actually like enact being proud.
Well, I would say this to you, and I'm also saying it to myself, that you don't have to be a public figure and a social media activist to be doing the good work, right? Like, how do you be a good ally? You talk, you connect with people, you argue with your
conservative family
members, exactly. Like, you take the opportunities to share your experience, validate the people that need it, and validate yourself. And it's going to be a collective change, and it already is happening.
I mean, on that note, I hope you've had a good Pride. I hope you've enjoyed it in some way that's personally fulfilling. I'm glad we could leave you on the last day with our thoughts on how weird of a world it's been to navigate for ourselves, and be completely honest about like where we're at, and hope that maybe like, as always, other people are where we're at, and that we can all navigate it together. It was nerve-wracking to bring this to subject today. I would waver to say for me, and possibly for Grace as well. And but I'm happy that we did it, because I think it's an important step forward to all acknowledge that we are a community. And if we're really a community, we should be able to talk about who we are honestly, straightforwardly, and about where we're actually at. Like, I didn't come here today to tell you these things in stride, like as giant pronunciations of who I am, but rather like to be seen and heard, and understand that pride is for all of us. Pride is for all of us. You know, there's no shame in that identity. So, but yeah, if you liked what you heard today, please subscribe on YouTube
and Spotify, and
follow us on Instagram, Studio Talks After Hours, and we will see you next week. Thanks so much
for listening.
Wait. 1, 2, 3. Thanks for listening. So that's really most of what I wanted to encapsulate. Like, gender doesn't rule things, but we do have interesting associations with it in the way we appreciate form, but like also like the way assuming the role of a sculptor makes me comfortable with the parts of myself that don't feel strictly feminine. But
I'm just kidding, but I wonder if your mom was low-key being like, we're all a little gay, honey.
I was like, what you do in college?
I know, like, Mom, tell me, please.
But anyway, it was just a sweet moment that felt like if I could leave you with anything comforting today, that it's that idea that everyone's on the spectrum, regardless of acknowledgement, awareness of anything, and we all would be more human to like admit that.